This transmission and transfer case combos looks a little better than most that you'll encounter when you go to take them apart. Reason being is because I've already power washed it once and actually dismantled it once before and put it back together for the video. So yours is probably going to look a lot worse than this as we take it apart, but that's okay. You'll be used to it. We're going to start off by removing the rear cover off of the Model 18 transfer case so that we can get to the output gear and nut that's on the end of it. We're going to remove these 5 bolts. You need a nice clean place to, or some place to store all these parts as you take them off. I use a bucket like this one, and I'm going to be putting all my parts into there. I don't normally use any air tools for taking these apart, but today, to expedite the video, I'm going to use one. You will not need to do that. You can use regular hand tools for everything you've got to do. With the rear cover removed off of the transfer case, we're now going to move on to removing the shift tower. With the shift tower removed, you can now see that the transmission is in neutral. The first reverse slide gear is in its central position, and the clutch sleeve is in its central position. Let's quickly run through what the gears are. If we slide this to aft side of the case, the transmission is now in reverse. If we slide this forward, the transmission is now in first gear. Put it back to neutral, now the transmission is in neutral. If we slide the clutch sleeve to the aft end of the case, we are now in second gear. And if we move it forward, we are in third gear. What we want to do right now is lock this transmission into 2 gears at once. So we can use either second or third gear, or combined with either first or reverse, or the other way around. Doesn't matter which one of them. So as long as you have the clutch sleeve locked into a gear and the first reverse slide gear locked into a gear, this will work. The transmission is now locked in place. It cannot turn. No matter what you do, it will not turn. So we're going to use it in this configuration to do 2 things. One, we're going to break the nuts loose on the yokes for the output shafts on the transfer case because it's very difficult to break those loose. We're also going to use it to break the nut loose inside the transfer case. If your rear output and front output shaft are locked together, but yet they turn independently of the main gear, you're in neutral on the transfer case. With this one all the way out and this one all the way out, you are now locked together so that when you lock into your 2 gears in the transmission, your transfer case is now locked as well. With this locked, we're going to also take off the front yoke nut. Once you've got it broke loose, you can screw it back on because we're not taking the yokes off right now. That's just for later if we plan to rebuild the transfer case. In order to remove the nut from the aft yoke, what we're going to have to do is remove this flange. So we'll take that off real quick. With the rear flange removed, we can now easily get to the rear output nut. Now that we've loosened up the output nut, we're going to reinstall the flange lightly, but at least it's broken loose now so that later when we want to rebuild it and tear it apart, it's easy to get to and we're not having to wrestle with it. So this is just a preliminary thing. If you're not planning to rebuild your transfer case, you don't have to take these off at all. With the 2 yoke nuts loosened up, we are now down to removing the nut off of the main gear so that we can remove the output gear. If you have difficulty removing this gear, remember that if you're still locked in 2 gears, it makes it very difficult to get that off. Or even if you're not locked in 2 gears and you're having difficulty getting that off, don't worry about it too much. In the guide, it once talked about getting a puller and getting in behind it. Once you remove all the bolts between the transfer case and the transmission and separate the 2 cases, that gear is going to pop off anyway, so don't worry about it. This next part is a choice you can either do or not do. It's totally up to you. I like to do it because it holds everything in place while we take the transfer case off. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this piece of coat hanger. Notice I've bent the wire over on the end so that you can't get cut from it from the sharp end. And we're going to loop it underneath the main gear and pull it back out. Then we're going to take 2 of the bolts that held our shift tower, put them in, slide them forward, and loop the wire around them. What that's going to do is lock the main gear in so that it can't fall out of the transmission when we separate the transmission from the transfer case. Now that we've removed the rear nut off of the output shaft or main gear, it's time to separate the transmission from the transfer case. The one nut that tends to get forgotten is this one right here. And the reason being is this is usually complete, and this one was too, completely caked up full of grease and mud and dirt and everything else to where it's hidden. You don't see it. So you're going to have to go dig this one out when it comes time to take this off. And I suggest you do it first so that you don't forget it. Because a lot of people have broken this ear off of the transmission by trying to force the case and the transmission apart without removing that nut or bolt. So we're going to go ahead and take that bolt out now. Alright, that takes us back to the last 4. Now that we've removed that hidden bolt that's on the front side of the transmission, we're going to take out the 4 bolts that are at the rear that hold the transmission and the transfer case together. With all the bolts out now, we should be able to separate the transmission and transfer case. Right in between the transmission and transfer case, there's a notch over here. I don't know that it was put there intentionally, but it makes a wonderful place to put a pry bar, big screwdriver, for separating the 2 cases. Now that they're separated, you can push your transfer case off to the side, and we're ready to continue on with the T-90 transmission.